I never hold it against them.
I think I mentioned it last time, but what my wife heard a lecturer say, did I say that last time?
No. What?
I'm supposed to speak for 45 minutes and you're supposed to listen for 45 minutes, but let me know if you finish first.
Right. Okay. Well, we have pretty good retention rates. I follow the numbers. But I always expect people to have to go to programs or something changes. It's not a big deal.
Yeah,
okay,
so
everybody.
It's middle of the day. It's middle of the day in LA. Is that right?
It's 2:30. It's an unusual time, but people are here. I mean, Hunter Kaplan is
That's
here.
very nice. Yeah. I'm sorry about that it's a difficult time for you. Yeah.
Well, you know what? When we have a good speaker, we'll work with the speaker. I probably wouldn't do a program at like the dinner hour. It's very important to our people. Between 5 to 7 is a blackout time for me. But 7:30 and later, no problem. And before 5 will do. Okay, everybody.
Changing here. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, just that schools have gone back now with some trepidation in Britain. So school hour now is more challenging.
Yes, I have. It's the United States is very unusual because we have different rules in different locations. My good friend in New York, his kids went on the bus to high school yesterday, and then I have friends in LA, and their students are at home learning. So, it's very unusual. Anyway, everybody, it's Wednesday, September 9th. For those of you counting, I believe it's 9 days to Erev Rosh Hashanah. Is that correct? Is the 18th or the 17th? When do you guys start in England?
18th.
Oh, good. Well, you start like the rest of us. Okay. So 9 days before Rosh Hashanah. And so, if our speaker's a little stressed out, it's because he has less than 9 days to get all his services organized and things are constantly changing. But I'm sure he'll be nice and calm. And this will be a great diversion. If you want to see kind of what we've been up to for Rosh Hashanah, and you go to our CSP website, occsp.net, and you'll see what's up there. And cycle through some of the videos. I think you'll enjoy them. Our topic for today, things my dog has taught me about being a better human. Many of you were with us last week when we learned about Rabbi Wittenberg's walking adventure from Germany to England with his dog, and we saw some video of that. And now we're going to actually meet the dog and see what we can learn. And I would assume we're going to learn things that are relevant to Rosh Hashanah and to being human. I mean, it's about being human. So.
Life in general. There's no particular Rosh Hashanah focus, although I might look at some of the things about forgiveness. Okay. But yes.
Well, and our speaker is this gentleman right here, Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, live from Finchley in the United Kingdom. This is CSP online program number 97. So we're going to hit 100 next week. Sponsored by Community Scholar Program. For those of you new and you have no idea who we are in our 20th year bringing the best Jewish thinkers in the world to Orange County, California. Since March, we are bringing them to the world. So many of you are coming in. Like there's my Uncle Trevor Katz. He's coming in live from Newton, Massachusetts. So hi, Trevor.
Welcome.
And he's from
I'm sure I also saw the tail of a cat wave, if I may so, on Kayla's screen. So
okay,
that will interest my dog.
The cats and the other animals are invited to this program.
Right.
We are dedicating this program in honor of Archibald Rousby Wolfenstein. He was known as Archie. He was my dog, my beloved dog. He passed away about a year ago. And I see Harrison Jan are godparents, were godparents to Archie. But his full name was Archibald Rousby Wolfenstein. So Archie, this program is for you. Okay. I wanted to welcome our partners from around the country, Seattle, New York, Boston, of course, California. Upcoming programs I wanted to mention, Thursday, which is tomorrow at 12 p.m. So not 12:30, at 12 p.m. Pacific time, Professor Sarah Boonen Benor, Jewish surnames and name changing around the world, diversity and unity. Saturday night, 8:30 p.m., Father Gregory Boyle, the founder of Homeboy Industries, which employs former gang members in downtown LA and is a model across the country for offering hope, purpose, and dignity. So Rabbi Wittenberg, I don't know if you've heard about this Father Gregory Boyle, but I'll send you.
No, it sounds most important. Yes. It sounds really, really moving.
Yeah, I will send you something about him. He's worth
Please.
Knowing. And that will be, and then afterwards there's slichot at CBI. So if you have slichot at your synagogues and they're a little later, come here, Father Boyle, and you can stay for a slichot with Amy, or you can go to your own slichot services. Sunday, September 13th at 12 p.m. Between Promise and Peril, Mapping Opportunities and Vulnerabilities for Israel and the Middle East with David Makovsky. Monday, September 14th, Clive Lawton is back. Oh no, not again, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, part 2. And just a few more. Tuesday, September 15th at 12:30 p.m., part 3 of 5. Rabbi Avi Strasberg, Revisiting the Jewish Bookshelf. We're going to be focusing on the Mishnah. Finally, Thursday, September 17th, 12:30 p.m., Justin Cami, who was here as a scholar about a year or two ago, will be with us. Why Tevye remains the greatest modern Jewish hero. If that is not diversity and eclecticism, I don't know what is, but we have lots of programs as we enter into the year. One thing I wanted to mention is CSP was supposed to be going to Israel this October. I see Mike Rubin, one of our travelers there, and the Schultzes as well. Of course, we can't go, and we decided in advance we weren't going to be able to go this October. So we're going to go next October. However, we are going on the same dates we were supposed to go to Israel. We're going to do our virtual tour to Israel for about 10 minutes. There'll be about 10 days of programs. I hope you'll join us when you find out. And the good news is you can wear whatever you want, and you can pack whatever you want for the trip, because you can do it from your own room. More details to follow. With that, let me say a few words about Rabbi Wittenberg. We will get started. Rabbi Wittenberg was born in Glasgow in 1957 to a family of German Jewish origin with rabbinic ancestors on both sides. The family moved to London in 1963, where he attended University College School, specializing in classical and modern languages. He further developed his love of literature when reading English at King's College in Cambridge. After teaching and social work in Israel and England, he took a PGCE. What does that mean? At Goldsmith College. Is that, I assume, it's some kind of degree?
An education, a teacher's qualification.
Wow, it's a very long bio here. I think I'll just mention that.
Forget it.
He has been working as the rabbi of New North London Synagogue and has taken a leading role in the development of the Masorti Movement for traditional and non-fundamentalist Judaism in England. And what he says is, when everything is over and this COVID madness is done and it's safe to travel, and you come to England and you come to his shul for Shabbos and you tell him, I was on your programs. I know about your dog. I know about your Ner Tamid, and I'm here, and where's Kiddush? And he will take care of you. So with that, Rabbi Wittenberg, tell us what you learned from your dog, who's there on the floor somewhere, I believe.
The dog is there on the floor, and you asked me, it's 10:30 at night, and he's nearly 15, so he was fast asleep. And I was asked to lure him into my study, which is in the garden. And I've got a piece of cheese here to sort of try and persuade him to come up to say hello. It's a real honor to be included, and it's a real pleasure, so thank you. Forgive the fact that it's late at night here in London, so my brain is sort of a little bit off boil, but I'm delighted to have a chance to leave Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, changing government regulations, what on earth is going to happen, to one side, and concentrate on one of my favorite things, which is the love of animals and the love of dogs. I will confess that I did not grow up with a dog. When I was 9 or 10, I was given a kitten for my birthday, Fluffy. And in a debate at school, I even defended the priority of cats as better pets than dogs. I have since, I'm afraid for cat owners, changed my mind. But I do appreciate that cats means a lot to many people. I'll chat a little bit, and then I'm going to read some extracts from my book, which is this, Things My Dog Has Taught Me About Being a Better Human. I'll tell you a bit about the origin of the book, and a little bit about my congregation, and then I'll bring the dog to say hello, and if it's okay with you, read extracts. If people have got questions or want to stop me, I'm fine with that. So I was discussing, after publishing this book about my father's family, one family and the final, my dear ones, one family and the final solution, I was chatting with my editor what to write next, and I happened to mention I could write about the dog. And he said, in England, people love dogs. It's certainly not just in England that people love dogs. Why don't you do it? And as I began to think about it, what I found, and this surprised me, was I was writing about faithfulness, friendship, love, cruelty, kindness, grieving, illness, mortality, all the things which if I was writing a book about being a community rabbi, I will be writing about in the context of my relationship with people, but doing it via the dog gave a slightly more subtle and indirect way of saying things that are actually about all aspects of life and not about dogs. But that's not surprising, because dogs go to the heart. And during lockdown here in my community, I mean, I think I'm guilty here. I think it's my fault, but there are probably more dogs per capita in my synagogue than in just about any other synagogue in Britain, possibly well beyond. And the number of people who have got puppies during lockdown is just huge. I don't know if it's like that by you as well, but it's certainly, I learned of 2 more here. The plus is it'll entertain the children, and we've got time at home to train the puppy while it's young. The downside, and kind of dog protection organizations have warned about this, is your puppy is now used to being around all day. Don't think your puppy will be happy if you start going back to work, because it won't. So there's some warnings there. And also there's some expectation that as more people go back to work, there'll be sadly rather a lot of young dogs turned over to rescue homes. I hope that doesn't happen, because as they say in Judaism, a dog is not just for Rosh Hashanah. So there are lots of puppies around my street. My dog is at the other end of life. He was born on the 10th of December, Parashat Vayetze, the portion in which Jacob's children are named. And we gave this Torah portion to our children who were in their teens and said, choose a name for the dog. And they couldn't think of a name from any of the Benjamins, Naphtali's, Levi's, and so on. Instead, they chose the name Mitzpah. So he's called Mitzpah, and more of that later. I didn't actually realize, we call him Mitzi for short, at least I do. This led to a very awkward scene. Here's the awkward scene. I was talking to our undertakers about a funeral arrangement, not a laughing matter. And the dog barked so loudly, I couldn't hear a word the lady was saying. So I said, Mitzi, shut up. And she said to me, I beg your pardon. And that's when I learned that people are also called Mitzi. This has become a standing joke between us, and the 2 Mitzis have since met and become firm friends. I'll just lure my dog over, and he'll say hello. And then I'll pick up some of the themes, but some of the serious themes are, I very much believe in the God of all creation. That God is present in all being, and that actually our relationship with nature, including animals, is profoundly important, and that we as a species have behaved with cruelty and contempt towards the natural world in ways which cannot be allowed to continue. And that's one of the great passions and kind of fearful areas of urgency in which I'm engaged, and dogs have been a bit of a gateway to that realization. I'll see if I can wake the dog up, and he is 15 and he's managing well, but it's not the same as being 3. Nick, come on over. You're wanted. Here, come on, there's some cheese there for you. Come on. Say hello. Oops, here you are, Mitzvah. Go on then. He'll just give you a wave. He's a border collie. He is beautiful and he is much loved, and he is not a small lap dog, as you can see. I'll release him now. He's done his shalom. And so the dog has really opened my heart as well. And the first dog we had came, I didn't grow up with dogs. As I said, my wife grew up on a farm south of London with all kinds of animals, including a pet alligator, snakes, ponies nearby, and a dog, and she was familiar with it. And we've been thinking about getting a dog, and a congregant rang me and said, my son found this dog in the street. We hear you're interested. If I take the dog to Battersea Dogs Home, they'll give the dog a week, and if no one claims the dog, they'll put the dog down. You wouldn't use that phrase of people, put them down. I can't do that, she said. Are you interested? So I rang my wife and she said, it's a boy, we don't want a boy dog. It's black, we don't want a black dog because you can't see the black dog if it disappears in the dark. You want a dog you can see when they go off at night, but we'll go and look. That was our great mistake. We went, we looked, the dog came running in, it licked our faces. 5 minutes later, we had the dog on the lead and we were heading home, and that dog brought us 15 years of almost unalloyed happiness. And I think I'm going to read some of the opening of this book. And I should also say the dogs are very much part of my congregational life. All I have to do in the morning to bring the dog to shul is I call Shacharit, and he comes running like a bullet. Sadly, it doesn't work with people. They don't come quite so fast. Here's how I've opened the book. The January sun gleams over the East Devon Valley, illuminating the bare branches of the trees on the crest of the opposite hill. Seagulls traverse the air, crying in the pale blue dawn. My dog and I walk slowly up the field, breathing the sharp air of the cold new day. He pauses by the base of a wild hazel, by the mossed trunk of a wind-stunted hawthorn. There's so much I wouldn't have noticed without my dog. It isn't that I didn't look before. I've always loved to hike and wander. My family have been my companions, fellow adventurers across forests and hills, through bogs, moors and streams, always returning muddy, tired and happy. But without the dogs, I wouldn't have been out so early on so many woodland and mountain mornings, or walked so late beneath the winter stars. I wouldn't have turned unafraid down paths to overspread with thick-leaved branches to admit the moonlight, or crossed for hours the empty moorlands, with only the company of rocks and water and grass. I wouldn't have experienced that special dimension of love, which transcends the human and brings animals too within its embrace. I wouldn't have known what reaching out a trembling hand to touch the fur on a dog's back could mean to an elderly lady transported to the solitary landscape of Alzheimer's disease. I wouldn't have understood how stroking a dog's head could prove so vital a bond with life for a young man too sick and exhausted for the laborious formulation of words. I wouldn't have appreciated the comfort a dog's tongue could bring, licking away tears, transforming an anguished face from pain to consolation. And I've seen so many times how it's possible to relate to a dog for people too weak, too tired, too sick, too bewildered, too much in pain for speech. And the dog then has made links and built bridges. I remember one occasion when somebody came into my study and sat down and he just wept. And 1 minute later, to his surprise and mine, the dog, weighing like 22 kilos, was sitting in his lap, licking away the tears. And I'm sure that others have had this experience as well. And I find the dog a blessing. So I've continued, Judaism has blessings for every eventuality. When struck by the beauties and wonders of creation, one says, "Blessed be God, in whose world it is thus." I like to say under my breath in addition, "Blessed be God, in whose world there are dogs." By the way, on Friday nights, of course, like every Jewish dog, who here has got a dog but doesn't give the dog challah? I bet no one. And interestingly, the dog never appears when you say Borei Pri Hagafen, but this nose emerges from under the table when you uncover the challah. The children insisted, if I bless them, I have to bless the dog too. Now, it won't have escaped people's attention that the Torah sadly lacks a blessing on Friday night for dogs. So I had to make one up. And I created this blessing, Yisimcha Elohim Kichlavim HaTovim. May God make you like the good, the very best of dogs. When I got a dog, my teacher was Rabbi Dr. Louis Jacobs, a very well-known rabbi, a non-fundamentalist thinker who challenged the establishment here. And he was not an animal person, but when I told him I'd got the dog, he told me the following story, a joke. And he said there was the story of a congregation where everybody, it was a frum congregation, everybody asked the rabbi questions about kashrut, except one man. So the rabbi said, how come you're not asking me about kashrut? So the man said to the rabbi, look, the Torah says, if something is treif, la kelev tashlichun oto, throw it to the dogs. So if I'm not sure if it's kosher or not, I throw it to the dog, and if the dog doesn't eat it, I know it's kosher. So about a year passed, and this man began to ask the rabbi questions about kashrut. The rabbi was surprised, and he said a bit nervously, Ya Nebuch, has your poor dog died? The man said, not at all. He's just become very machmir, very strict. So in writing this book, I found, as I said, I found myself very much writing about the themes that I would have written about relationships with people. But, and again and again, the feelings that come up are feelings that relate to people. And that's why I've called it the subtitle, Things My Dog Has Taught Me About Being a Better Human. Here's a passage which is partly humorous, but partly absolutely not. I was dog ignorant when we had our first dog. I had no idea how to communicate with a dog. One Sabbath morning, when we'd returned from prayers and everyone was hungry, I found myself prevented from laying the table because Safi, our first dog, was blocking my way. Do please sit down, I said, or something similarly ineffective in the polite, if slightly insipid tones with which one might address a respected guest. Not like that, observed my mother-in-law, who had been a primary school teacher all her working life. Sit, she told Safi, delivering the instruction quietly, but with such firm and total conviction that every single person in the room promptly sat down, while the dog sunk obediently onto his haunches. One day, several months after he'd become part of our family, Safi barked at the postman. It was only then we realized that until that moment, he had never, ever barked, never even once emitted so much as a single stifled growl. His confidence, he was a rescue dog from the street, had been so thoroughly destroyed by the trauma of his abandonment that his voice had been completely silenced. For many further months, he never left our sight, not even to go into the garden to do his business. We had to wait for him and watch over him like a parent over a toddler. If that was what abandonment could do to a dog, I found myself wondering, what would it do to children? In Pearls of Childhood, Vera Gissing wrote about her experiences as a child rescued from Nazi Europe on the Kindertransport. Here you shall be loved were the first words spoken to her by the woman she came to call her English mummy when she arrived in the country as a young refugee schoolgirl. She'd been separated from her parents, whom she was destined never to see again, uprooted from hearth and home and placed on a train to Britain, where she knew not a single living soul. But many equally bewildered and uncomprehending children never heard any such words or affectionate tones ever again in their lives. I hope our dog understood that here in our house, he was and would be loved. And he certainly was. But I've become aware, we've been very involved in refugees in our family, because both my parents were refugees from Nazi Europe. Both of them fled when they were 16. And we've hosted, there's an organization here called Refugees at Home, where you can host refugees who need a bed, sometimes for a night, sometimes a week, sometimes some months. One of them has become virtually part of our family, and several have stayed here. And I've become aware of what a terrible time they've been having during lockdown, because so many of the support services have simply not been able to function, and people have been unable, for health reasons, to offer hospitality. And the traumas of losing everything have so often been repeated. And that's one of the things I really learned from the dog. I often think about that. If that's what it was like for a dog, what is it like for a child? I'm gonna talk a little bit about the dog's Jewish life before going back into some more serious themes. Actually, I'm just going to continue that theme of abandonment for a moment, if you don't mind, and then I'll go to the dog's Jewish life. I also need to watch that I don't talk on forever and bore everybody stiff. There's a section here on cruelty, and I struggle with cruelty. I'm not a person who's never lost his temper. I can understand people get angry. I can understand people feel envious sometimes, but I really, really don't understand how people can be gratuitously cruel. I was once, unfortunately, of all places in Jerusalem, on a Shabbat afternoon. I came across a group of teenagers, and they just stoned a hedgehog to death in the middle of the pavement. Now, why does somebody do such a thing? And there's such immense cruelty in our world. And I suppose perhaps cruelty comes from having been cruelly treated. But I'm appalled. Probably people mistreat their animals for the same kinds of reasons they beat or abuse their wives or children. It's part of the same syndrome of domestic cruelty. A vet explained to me that social services ask them to look out for signs of violence on animals and, if necessary, report them. The owner brings in a dog with broken ribs and bruises. You ask what happened, and he comes up with a story of how it fell out of the window. But dogs almost never fall out of windows. You can see at a glance that this isn't the truth. Humans aren't the only species frightened by the ghosts of earlier bad experience. Mary Oliver's moving poem about her new dog, Benjamin, who came from who knows where, takes a strikingly insightful and compassionate turn. It's a wonderful poem. I've quoted it in full with her permission, and I'll read it. What shall I do? When I pick up the broom, he leaves the room. When I fuss with kindling, he runs for the yard. Then he's back, and we hug for a long time. In his low to the ground chest, I can hear his heart slowing down. Then I rub his shoulders and kiss his feet and fondle his long hound ears. Benny, I say, don't worry. I also know the way the old life haunts the new. It's such a line, how the old life haunts the new. I'll swap over to some lighter things. Both dogs, I realized also, this is not for a Jewish audience, this is for a general audience. And actually I've made many, many friends in the Christian community through this book, particularly of priests and vicars who've told me about their dog going to church. There was one particularly striking, embarrassing story by a vicar who said, my dog always comes to church with me, and when I give the sermon, sits beneath the altar, but unfortunately falls asleep and snores really loudly. That's pretty embarrassing. Fortunately, that hasn't happened to me. The dogs are very much part of my community. But I also realized that this book is a way of bringing the non-Jewish reader into an awareness of Jewish life in a very quiet, kind of conscious way. So I made a point of writing about it. Both dogs love to accompany me to prayers. I'd only to call out synagogue or shacharit the name of the morning service, and mitzvah would invariably come running. I only wish the appeal would be equally effective with the two-legged members of my community. He sleeps happily in my study until the prayers are over, an opportunity no doubt envied by some of the human participants in the dawn congregation. If I know that everyone in attendance is comfortable with dogs, I occasionally let him doze in the corner of the room where we pray. He lies there, eyes closed, for all the world profoundly immersed in the liturgy of praises to God, who made heaven and earth, the wild and domestic animals, the birds of the air, and the fishes in the sea. His presence, when he doesn't misbehave, is deeply calming. A friend who had recently lost her sister spent an entire service sitting quietly next to him. That dog, she said afterwards, was exactly what I needed. A canine talent of which I failed to take due advantage is connected to the requirement in Jewish prayer of a minyan. Traditionally, this would have consisted of 10 adults, but nowadays many communities, including mine, count women equally. But what was to be done if at the crucial moment in the service, when the 10 were needed to enable the recital of the most sacred prayers, one person or more was lacking? If I'd thought of it when he was young, I would have trained Mitzvah, who's a border collie and a really intelligent dog, to leave the synagogue with a note attached to his collar saying, "2 more, urgently needed," and bark outside the front door of the houses of congregants living on the same block, alerting them to the indispensable importance of their immediate attendance. The dogs also took full part in study activities in our home. Safi in particular showed a persistent interest in Jewish learning. He faithfully attended virtually all my classes, carefully positioning himself to best advantage. Every Thursday morning, he would sit behind my friend David, who's sadly since gone to his eternal rest, not just because David was a true scholar, but mainly because he expressed his adoration of God's creatures by surreptitiously slipping the dog an unconscionable quantity of biscuits. It's not good for his waistline, we'd say, but our words fell on deaf ears and on a large, open mouth. On Wednesday evenings, when the room was often packed with students, Safi preferred to lie underneath the table where he could absorb his lessons in undisturbed meditation. One day, an unfortunate and especially pungent smell emerged from down below and drifted unpleasantly across the room. "Safi, out," I said firmly, lifting the edge of the tablecloth to check on his precise location. But the dog was not in the room. Dogs who accompany their minister humans require certain interfaith skills. Of these, Safi did not always prove himself capable. While sleeping for the duration of a service of any denomination is well within the capacity of most dogs and many humans, knowing how to react to previously unfamiliar religious symbols requires a degree of discrimination and forbearance. In Safi's defense, he'd never been near a Christmas tree before. I guess you know what's going to go wrong. His instinctive conclusion that if there's a tree, it must mean I'm outdoors was only too understandable. By the time I had shouted at him to stop, the telltale evidence of his misdemeanor was dripping from the ribbons and wrapping paper of an entire pile of presents. The silence, while I carefully wiped them down with an undersized tissue, was excruciating. Never again, if I see a Christmas tree, I yank the dog away. Is it okay if I read maybe for 5 more minutes or 7 more minutes? Is that all right? And then comments, questions. I'm going to go to 1 or 2 of the more serious parts of the book. And about listening. One of the dogs they're excellent listeners. In innumerable times, the dog has sat underneath the table, underneath the chair, while people have poured out their hearts. And it feels like the dog is a real presence. And there's certain gifts dogs have of listening that I think we can learn from. Not, of course, that dogs don't often also fail. A fox stalk through the garden, and Mitzvah races off barking like a maniac. Or he gets bored and wanders away with a nonchalant lack of interest, which most human beings have the decency at least to try to disguise. But as often as not, dogs do stay and listen. Both Safi and Mitzvah spent innumerable hours next to the sofa, underneath the table, or at the feet of a visitor in tears. They had two advantages over humans. Firstly, their confidentiality was beyond question. I've occasionally thought what a disaster it would be if the dogs were to learn to talk, given the innumerable conversations they've overheard, patiently listening to the tribulations of 1,000 lives. How much would people be prepared to pay for their silence? Secondly, they never put their paw in it by saying the wrong thing. They offer neither trite advice nor unhelpful platitudes. There exists no stethoscope to place against the ribcage of another being to hear the unspoken language of its heart, except a listening heart of one's own. I would like to be as devoted a listener as a dog at its best. But listening is a two-way process. Why should dogs listen to us if we never listen to them? Dogs depend on us to do something harder than hearing their words, or barks, or growls, or cries. We have to listen to their silences too. We can't even know how often dogs feel misunderstood or totally unheard. In the mixed species families, of which they often form such a loving part, they are almost always in the minority, the outsider whose language no one shares, whose signals no human adequately comprehends. Soon after Safi joined our family, a friend took me aside and said, "You know, having a dog is in some ways an even greater responsibility than having children." "Why?" I asked, puzzled. "Because a dog can't tell you how he's feeling. You have to learn to understand." Actually, I think that's often true with people as well. People often don't, can't, or feel reticent of telling you how they're feeling, or find it hard to bring the words to express it. And one has to, all our lives, we're trying to learn to understand. I think I'm going to pause there for a bit, and perhaps at the close of this session, just read the concluding chapter of the book, where I also talk about what I would miss out on life if I didn't have a dog. I couldn't imagine now. I couldn't imagine living without a dog. It's just, no. And during lockdown, he's followed me every step of the way wherever I am. Ari, can I hand over to you in case there are comments or questions that people want to pass on?
A lot of comments about people's own pets and their stories, but a few questions for you. Number one is, given your relationship to the natural world and things you've mentioned to us, people are wondering, are you a vegetarian or vegan?
Yes, I'm a vegetarian with vegan leanings. I'm not completely vegan. I don't know that I will be. I also have I'm insulin dependent diabetic, so so that places a lot of restrictions. But I've cut down what I eat dairy massively. And one of my daughters has just become vegan, so that's an incentive. And I think it is the ideal, because the cruelty of the animal industries is unbearable.
So that was one question. The second is for me, which is, I've often thought, I know there's a church out here that has a famous service once a year. It's called Blessing of the Animals, where you bring your animals to the church and the pastor or the priest, whoever it is, blesses the animals. And I always thought the synagogue should do that. So have you ever done anything like that, blessing of the animals at your synagogue?
I have. And actually the first time I did this was in America with my close friend and colleague, Rabbi Mark Soloway, who's the rabbi of the conservative synagogue in Boulder, Colorado. And it's great because he's got a field outside his synagogue, and about 20 dogs were there. And we said a blessing for the dogs. And we asked everybody to say something that they had learned or they felt a gift they'd had from their dog. And here in London, I've done a couple of things. I mean, I'm waiting to do another, but lockdown makes it difficult. We had a puppy blessing. I live around the corner from the synagogue and have a very large garden. So we had a puppy blessing in the garden, about 10 or 12 puppies. And I defined a puppy as any dog under 2. And I'm waiting to do that again. And at the beginning of lockdown, we had a show us your dog session. And then the week later, we had a show us your cat. So absolutely. Absolutely.
So I guess you have to be careful, not all the animals at the same time. You just differentiate, like one Shabbos is the cat, one is the dog, then you have birds.
Yes, there would be tohu vavohu otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
We have people watching, for good friends of ours, Noah and Dahlia Taft, who recently, about a year ago, I say, adopted their dog. And Noah is not a fan of Musaf, and he wants to know if your dogs are fans or not fans of Musaf in general.
Is this a question to me? I'm sort of, you're
Yes.
fading a little. I'm losing it a bit. So
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of Musaf either.
No. Oh, okay.
I'm not particularly keen on the animal offerings, but we've actually had an interesting idea in my community that I haven't fully developed yet, which is the Musaf offering describes Shnei Kavasim B'nei Shana, 2-year-old kids, young sheep. And what I'm trying to do, we did it a little, but I didn't see it through, is there many parts of the world where through good gifts, I'm sure there's the equivalent in the States, they're farmers or particularly women who have no livelihood, and you can sponsor the gift of a cow so that the family has milk, or kids for goat's milk. And the notion that our Musaf offering would be that every week somebody would come forward who would sponsor such a gift to somebody in the world who needed it. And that would be, as it were, a gift to God's world in lieu of a gift to the altar. But I'm not a fan of Musaf. And also, I take the dog on Friday night to shul when we're actually able to be in the synagogue. But I don't take it on Shabbat more. The dog on Shabbat more, it's just too long.
So it does sound like being a rabbi or even a pastor or in that role, and having a dog that's friendly, as long as the people that are coming to your house or with you are okay with it, is a valuable asset. And more people, it's like a comfort animal, not just for you, but for the people that you serve. So it sounds like something that rabbis should generally look into, in addition to just having a dog for their own, as part of their own family.
And somebody said to me, I think if we discussed in the family, the dog humanizes our household, which is a funny thing to say about a dog. But we also have, all our family are animal lovers. So at one point we had 40 guinea pigs, 2 rabbits, as well as the dog. And for many years, the children ran a pet hotel where we would give board and lodging to small animals while their owners were away. We had a snake, rabbits, loads of guinea pig, hamsters. We didn't have dogs, actually. So people often, during lockdown, people have rung me and said, can my children please come and play with your guinea pigs? People are missing that contact. And actually, especially children and adults on the autistic spectrum, and it's such a broad spectrum, many of us probably belong to it, just the contact with animals is profoundly calming. There have been several people who've acquired a share in a horse during lockdown, which allows them 1 day a week to go and muck out the horse, ride it, feed it. And I've also noticed that it isn't just the children. When they come into the house, many adults will simply go to the animals. And it suggests to me that we have an inner need to be more profoundly in contact with nature than we are. I'm not a knowledgeable, but I'm a keen bird watcher. Again, we're lucky to have this big garden. And outside my study, by the window, there's a bird feeder. And the number of people who've written to me about the birds they've seen, the insects, the flowers they've noticed during lockdown, we've been more attentive, but also more spiritually attuned to what I would call the presence of God in nature. People talk about that. And the dog, one of the things a dog does is force you out to see. Another thing which I write about, but I haven't read from, is the relationship between dogs and grieving. I would never suggest to somebody who has had a very painful bereavement, I would never say to them, you should get a dog. But if they say, I'm thinking of getting a dog, I would encourage. Because one of the things a dog does is it forces you to get up in the morning when you just cannot face it. There's less loneliness in a house. It's not the same, but there's less loneliness in the house when there's a dog there. And there's a tragic thing in our community where a couple lost their 20-something-year-old son in a freak air gliding accident. Nobody really knows what actually happened. And I went to see them when I heard. And then they said, where's your dog? And of course, I'd left the dog in the car. You know, I wouldn't have taken the dog uninvited into a home of a tragic loss like that. Where's your dog? Bring him in. And I did. And they got a puppy after the shiver. And then they really said that dog took us through for two reasons. One is there were many days when we could not face getting up in the morning, and we had to. The other is just the unbounding love, which restored somehow the things which can't be healed, but it restored some sense of positivity about life. And I think that's not rare that people find that kind of companionship. The other thing which dogs do, and I read this somewhere, is communities of dog walkers develop. There was, I read a book about a young woman who'd been widowed very suddenly in her 20s. Her husband had a stroke or something, and I'll respond to the question about Lev in a minute, and died very suddenly. And she said all kinds of horrible advice, and people mistreated her and tried to take advantage of her. She was a young woman. And one person said to get a puppy, and she thought this was so crazy, it was so different from anything else, it was so absurd, and so ridiculous, and so irrelevant that she did it. Then she said, people in the park talked to the dog. And then they talked to her. And then they became interested in who she was and what had happened to her, and they became her friends. And she said it was the best advice she had because it drew her back into the companionship of society. So I think there's a very big healing aspect to dogs. And I'm very, very involved with the Israel Center for the Training of Guide Dogs. I've run marathons for them, and I support them. And I write in this book about trauma dogs, about therapy dogs, about dogs who can detect diabetes and cancers. As for the Hebrew as the dog, the word lev, and you break up the word kelev, you have lev, like the heart. It is so. I think it is so.
Can you tell us about some stories of traveling, of walking with your dog that you talked to us about the adventure last week, but about specifically about the dog going from Germany to London?
Yeah, I don't want to go back to what I said last week. So if I say something different, is that all right? So one of the walks that I've done with the dog is it's in the north of Scotland. I was born in Scotland and I love Scotland. And I mean, not like the huge empty areas of the States, but one can walk all day and see nobody except what can be quite bleak countryside. One wants a compass and a map. One does not want to get lost in these areas with just the rock and the stone and the water. And I do that walk on my own. Usually I see not a soul from morning till late at night. And I do it partly because it inspires a certain awe and fear in me, a deep respect for creation. And it brings to mind feelings of mortality. One feels so small in this environment. And the dog has accompanied me several times, and I feel I love having the dog for company, but I also feel safer. And interestingly, sometimes when I can't make out the route, the dog seems to know, whether he smells the footfall of people who've walked there before. And he's great company. Once when I did that walk, I saw not a living thing, birds, but no animals or anything, for 7 or 8 hours of walking. And then finally I came to a place there was a sheep. And I talked to this sheep. And because I care so much for these bonds, I mentioned it in a sermon. And I said, I spoke to the sheep. The sheep, of course, didn't answer, but I felt its companionship. And afterwards, it turned out, somebody had said to another congregant quietly when I said that, "Is your rabbi always mad?" This comment came the way because the person who made that comment didn't realize he was sitting next to my son, to whom he made it, who relayed it happily back to me. It's a standing joke in the family. I'm quite aware of time, and I just want to read the closing section of this book. Is that all right? I also appreciate there are many questions in the chat, and there are many comments also about supporting animal charities. And I'll just say this about tzedakah. The classic, the classic Jewish attitude tzedakah is hakarov kodem, our primary responsibility to ourselves, our family, our needy community, the Jewish community, Israel. And also the Talmud says that one gives to the non-Jewish sick and the non-Jewish poor, b'nei darkei shalom, because of the ways of peace. And our societies, I'm very fearful of this winter because the economic impacts, I imagine it's similar in the States, they're really going to hit hard. And we need to give. But I also feel there's a huge priority for environmental charities, because if the world is not reforested, if we do not bring climate change under urgent control, there will be more and more hunger and more destitution. And the issues of refugees and climate change are profoundly connected. So I think environment charities, tree planting, you kindly gave a donation on my behalf to jtree.global, which I really appreciate. These things are super important. I'd just like to read the last part of this book. It's just a page and a bit. I hope that's okay. He's looking at you with so much love, a friend observes, as Mitzvah stares up at us from underneath the table. It's mutual, I say, and afterwards feel a fool for being so sentimental. But without the dog, my heart will be less open, not just to animals, but to people, nature, and the presence of God in the world. The Hebrew for dog is kelev. Taken on its own, the second syllable, lev, means heart. When k precedes a word, it signifies a comparison, like. So kelev can also mean like the heart. A dog is like the heart. My dogs have not just helped me discover more of my own heart and the hearts of others. They have led me deeper into the heart of what matters most in life: trust, generosity, and a listening, receptive soul. Without the dogs, Nicky, my wife, and I wouldn't have gone out at 4 o'clock one May morning in Wales, when Safi was old and Mitzvah so young he'd woken us by messing on the floor. And after cleaning up, we'd put on our boots and taken the puppy and watched the dawn transform the steep, dark fields into sparkling green, and listened to the birds and the call of the lambs, and returned an hour later refreshed and rejoicing, because life itself had blessed us, and gone back to sleep with the dogs at rest on the floor. Without these dogs, I wouldn't have reached wearily for my anorak at 1:45 and headed through the early autumn cold for the heath, where, releasing Mitzvah from the lead, I would watch my tiredness evaporate like the mist from my breath, and feel as I followed at a run the dog's disappearing tail. What a joy it was to be alive, and stopping to watch a hedgehog crawl through the grass and inhaling the sharp air beneath the trees. Understood how deeply vibrant all this living world is. Without the dogs, I wouldn't have been so aware of the frightening swiftness of the passage of time. I wouldn't have observed with an anxious heart how summer by summer Safi's hips were getting weaker, or felt with such fear the steady, irreversible encroachment of mortality on the puppy young boisterousness of our companionship. I wouldn't have been marked so intensely, watching the dog years flow irreversibly through the hourglass, or been rendered so vulnerable by the irretrievable preciousness of the days. I wouldn't have blessed each tail-wagging morning with the same carpe canem joy. I've measured out my life by the way the dog runs, tugs, walks, begins to limp, becomes more pronouncedly halt. Is this his final summer, our last summer together? I see Mitzvah and the children playing on the Scottish beach in the last red glimmer of the western twilight across the blackening water. I watch them slowly turn into shadows, moving in the gentle tide, fading with everything visible into the all-embracing dark, and turn away and weep. And I know I must not waste it, this fragile gift of fleeting time, for wonder, companionship, and love. Thank you for letting me be with you and for letting me share something about the animals I love. Thank you.
Thank you. If you do have your dogs there, you can go hug them. You can show them up on the screen. Your writing is very beautiful, and
thank you.
So I look forward to reading this book and some of your other books. I will share links with people. And
thank you very much.
I just have two unrelated final questions, if you have a moment. Just
sure.
One is, do you watch The Queen, like the show that we watch here on Netflix? Is that something that you watch? And there's Billy, the newest member of the.
Is that? Oh, there's a lovely dog there.
Another dog.
Is that Sharon, the one about the life of the Queen? Yes. Yes.
You enjoyed that?
And she and her corgis.
Yes.
There's a number of dogs appearing.
That's why I thought. Yeah, a lot of dogs.
Yeah.
Deborah Paul. Good. Yeah. Hello, dogs.
Oh, it's so nice to see the
everybody.
dogs.
We have a minyan. We almost have a minyan. We could probably do mincha.
Yeah. Dogs. We do a pre-Shabbat service, and it almost always ends by people's dogs being shown, sort of preparing to have their challah.
Nice. Look at that. Oh, let me take a
my
picture,
goodness.
Guys. Hold up your dogs.
How lovely.
Get a picture.
How lovely.
So,
please send it to me. Please send it to me. I really, I could do that.
A picture of your dogs, everybody.
I'm delighted if people read my book. It should be available. Certainly, it should be available.
So that was the question about whether you enjoy people watch The Queen. We do here. But the second is about the Jewish community in Scotland. Is like going up there is obviously going up to see nature, but is there also Jewish stuff to see up there?
There's a community in Glasgow. It was a big community. It's now much, much smaller because people have migrated. Many have made Aliyah and others have migrated south. There's a small community in Edinburgh, which is such a beautiful city. And then there are groups of Jews obviously scattered there, as there are everywhere. There are a number of Kindertransport people who are now older, refugees in different places, including in the far north of Scotland. There are always, people scattered. But the big communities in Britain are in Manchester and the southeast. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. Valuable time in the weeks leading up to Rosh Hashanah. Wish you Shana Tova, and we hope to see you back on Zoom, but hopefully in person.
I'd love to. It's a privilege and a pleasure, and you've been very generous to me, and I really appreciate it. And it's very, very lovely to see everybody's dogs. I wish everybody a Shana Tova, and I hope it's a very good and strong year for our relationship, not just with our dogs, but with all of nature.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Rabbi Wittenberg.
Thank you. Yom Na'im. A good day. Thank you.
Good to see you, Billy.
Bye.
And Rhea Dorn. I see the Dorn dog, and oh my goodness,
There's a lot of dogs there. That's so nice.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, take your dogs out for a nice walk on the.
Yeah, I think I might still take mine on a late night walk now.
Okay. Enjoy, everybody.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll see you soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.